As Nancy Levin has gracefully put, every entrance is also an exit. Any major transition has the capacity to be a catalyst for rebirth. It's up to us to allow in what's possible, whether blissful or challenging, and respond to it in a life-affirming way. The graceful exit is a transitional period. You've detached from your old life and jumped across the threshold into your new world, but you haven't yet fully landed in your new way of being. Once you've jumped, it's not all roses and sunshine. It isn't like you never turn around and look back. You may still have doubts and growing pains. The jump is only the beginning of your new life. It's natural to feel disoriented during this time, or even a bit out of control. It's okay. It's all part of the graceful exit. Honor the space between no longer and not yet. This is liminal space. Liminality was first defined by German folklorist Arnold van Gennep in the 12th century and adopted by British cultural anthropologist Victor Turner into his own studies during the 1950s. It is derived from the Latin root limen, meaning threshold. Liminality, as conceptualized by Turner, was a transitional phase between two major phases, where individuals in liminality are betwixt and between. During this phase, these individuals do not belong to the life, society, or phase that they did previously, yet are still not fully incorporated into the new life, society, or phase that is waiting for them right around the corner. This liminal space is a limbo period, characterized by ambiguity, humility, seclusion, solitude, unease, and a general grayness. This is the space between the black and the white, the space between the light and the shadows, between the pain and the perseverance, the non-existence between two existing instances, the present between the past and the future. Right here, I will now present you with two personal takes on the concept of liminal space. My first interpretation of this is that liminal space is the space between chaos and order. This interpretation was first brought to my attention by British photographer Sean Tucker, back when he was going through his own transitional period while moving houses, at the same time coping with his decades-long wife suddenly packing her things and leaving one day, and him finding himself after coming home from work in a dark and desolate old apartment that is about to be a space of the past. I found my own version of the story, interestingly enough, about less than a year later, when I found myself amidst the conclusion of a long-term relationship while I was abroad, and away from my ex-partner, and away from all of my friends and all the life that I had established, all during her presence before. I found myself trapped in the space between dissolution and solution, between ambiguity and resolution. In fact, within this space is where exactly I had been writing the script for this very video, which is one of my many attempts to pick up my shattered pieces and glue them all together and make sense of everything. During this phase of semi-order, various past consistent factors and the factors that had kept emerging from the gray, from the boundary between the dark and the light, had brought upon me the fact that I had been a victim of an incredibly abusive relationship, characterized by overarching toxicity, manipulation, neglect, and both verbal and emotional abuse. If not for this gray, I would not have noticed that I'm striding my steps away from the dark and into the light, away from disorientation into directionality. I'm moving in between the forever and the temporary, at times confused as to which is which. If not for the semi-order, I would not have noticed that I'm backing away from the chaos and into the sense of order. Using art, I can attempt to further explore the distinction between these dark, gray, and light periods of my life. Now let's look at the art that I've been creating throughout my trajectory of coming into, experiencing, and emerging out of this dark period of my life. I should mention that I do photography, and I have been doing photography for a consistent 8 years now. It is my reliable and objective or subjective method of gaining a broad analysis of my viewpoint, my emotional processes, my own personal stories, and other of my observed stories at any point in time. I create stories out of everything. I see stories in everything, and I appreciate stories within everything. Therefore, the lack of presence of personal photography would also indicate that I had also fully lost a sense of authority and control over my own life story. But we'll get to that point later on. Since February of 2022, I was also admitted into 3 new newspapers and magazines, so I made the stark transition to a more reportage style of photography from my typical personal street photography. This was accompanied by a lack of personal available time and energy due to the strain and drain of the ongoing abusive relationship. The products of my work during this time captured quite well to my eyes this chaos period of my life. Even though at first glance it really doesn't seem like it, even more so the opposite on the surface. My newfound reportage images were action-packed, vibrant, and conveys a lot of upfront emotion, which are some of the core pillars of reportage photography, or photojournalism. And I do give myself credit for being able to nail down the philosophy of a new trajectory of photos so quickly. I can also pride myself on the color grading work that I did throughout these images. But on the other hand, leaning more artistically, abstractionally, and subjectively, all of these elements had already seemingly taken up so much of the visual and mental or emotional estate, leaving me virtually no room for myself, the artist, to blend elements of my own progressing stories into the canvas. Retrospectively, it seems like that it does show on an abstract level that refers to my life during that time that whatever was in front of my face outside of my influence at the time had already been way too much for me to still have room to be myself. These frames, while arguably visually captivating to some, to me, the creator, they hold no emotional weight, and they contain no other layers of depth and storytelling underneath their fabric. They are as true as they came and as true as they went, and I had no say in the coming and going of these stories while I stood, observed, and captured them for my jobs. Contrasting this to my previous approach to this art, you can kind of see the differences between these exemplary frames. Sure, my old and long comfortable style presents a lot more elements within a single frame, with more intentional edits and elemental interplay between composition, lighting, and color grading. And one might also suggest that my typical photography is crowded, messy, unorganized, or just outright chaotic. But to me, all of them are intentionally laid chaos. The conflict between highlights and shadows represent my own inner conflict and how I rationalize my own life story. The clash between the hot and the cold present a cold and lonely view of self, while I'm trying to open myself up to all of the warm and vibrant corners of the world around me. The border between real and reflection represent the duality of self, lonely, isolated, and sad at times, but holding on to an inherently wholehearted love and a profound appreciation for the world and the magnificent patterns emerging from the chaos all around. Not to toot my own horn too much, but there is always at least one other layer to any of my pieces, whether it be artistically or story-wise, since the very reason I ever picked up that camera and clicked that shutter in the first place was to pursue a sense of therapy and self-discovery. I look out to look inwards. I look around to find a mirror. I find myself within the world around me, and I hope that the world around me sees me as well, and will hold me tight in between its pockets of warmth and fascination. Fast forward to after the season of my official reportage works for the spring of 2022, there was a prolonged period of my life where photography seemed to barely exist. I found myself trapped within the loop of endlessly pouring all of my living time, energy, and sanity into aspects of the abusive relationship, and ruminating about it without even the thought of any exit due to a consistently reinforced trauma bond. All of that had left me without any room for personal preservation and development, and thus I would not pick up a camera for any further reason other than private commissions related to my ex-partner that also had left me feeling incredibly ashamed and undervalued, further pushing me away from the camera. These private commissions, as you might have guessed, also made me feel incredibly proud of my color grading work, thematic consistency, and elemental abundance, but once again had me feeling empty, and I would be damned if I said there was any emotional or storytelling fabric behind these frames. The reason for that was because I legitimately could not find within myself any interesting or noteworthy story that I was experiencing during that time, and even though of course I had always been experiencing the stories of my life in the first person, it absolutely didn't feel like so for the time period. I had lost control of my own life narrative, and every single day went by as if I was floating amidst a stream along a tall and steep waterfall that had no shortage of heavy water pressure in sight. I was lost, truly lost, and along with that, I had lost the sense of self, self-identity, self-direction, and self-control. My life and worldly perception were completely in the hands of someone else who, deep down, did not know what they were doing. Being thrown out of that directionless ship, I found myself floating in this semi-order of a liminal space. Regaining control over my own narrative, my first instinctual feeling was that I was leaving a sense of order that I was so used to, and waiting to step foot into a new world of chaos and multi-directionality. But that narrative did not make sense. None of it made sense. It made too much sense when paired with the narrative I was fed for the longest time. But all of that had been questionable since the very beginning. The moment I regained control over my own life, that narrative began to crumble from its roots, and I am finding myself in recalibration. The truth of the matter is, I am stepping away from all the chaos, all of the aimlessness and the lack of control, back into captaining my own ship and firsthand telling my own story after a very long time. This liminal space is meant to transition me from the chaos into the order, from the dark into the light. It is a space of semi-order. Now, let's backtrack and explore another interpretation of liminal space. When people speak of liminal space in a modern artistic framework, they are usually referring to spaces that are typically perceived to be occupied by people, animals, objects, etc., that are captured during their transitional periods, when they are empty and not being used and waiting to be used again the next day or time. These depictions of physical liminal spaces also provide us with another interpretation of the mental, emotional, and psychological liminal space. The depictions of typically occupied spaces in a state of emptiness before inevitably being occupied again show us that liminal space can be the space of order in between chaos. This interpretation had me thinking back about my previous take on my perceived transition between order and chaos. Another way to look at it is, yes, liminal space is the orderly transition between the stages of chaos. I am currently amidst a calm after one storm and before another. Stepping out of an abusive relationship, I slowly came to realize that the past 2 years were among the most chaotic and storm-filled days that I have ever experienced in my entire life leading up to today. In about less than a year, my life would be following a yet-to-be-determined trajectory that would decide where I will end up taking my life for the next few decades. This transitional period signifies the importance of both chaotic periods of my life that sandwich it. As I've mentioned before, similar to my art, things can be taken as chaotic and messy. But the most consistent trait that I've always been able to hold on to was the ability to embrace the chaos and see the beauty in it. And just like art, I can observe the patterns that emerge from all the chaos, capture them, and embrace them. After all, those patterns I retained throughout thick and thin are the essence of who I really am and what I value the most. In other words, my story. This liminal space, this breather that I am granted, is here to help me take a step back and put things into perspective, and to be able to reconcile these distinctions between stages. Thanks to these moments of order, I am able to walk among my everyday chaos and cherish and appreciate it for all that it is, instead of cowering in fear and unease. At the end of the day, and you'll have to excuse the cheese, the second law of thermodynamics always holds true. Entropy within my closed system is always going to increase, and things are inevitably going to just get more and more chaotic. What better way to confront the mess than to use that liminal space to reflect upon the patterns that emerge from the mixing of the stages of chaos? This is the space of chaotic order. Another interpretation of artistic liminal spaces can also refer to places and spaces of transition and in between that serve no other purpose than to transition people and things from one place to another. For example, a hallway, an elevator, a lobby, or the baggage claim area of an airport. Leaning into this definition, we can also see liminal spaces as pockets of chaos amidst a stream of order. I recognized that the reason that I'm scrambling to do everything and try everything that seemingly fits my character was that I'm trying to find that which works. Like it or not, I did play some role in the breaking of my own self, and I'm trying to find ways to heal and attempt to put the broken pieces back together so that, after this, the intact self can move forward securely in an orderly fashion. Both the acts of breaking and mending represent the period of chaos, just as entering and leaving physical liminal spaces constitute presence within the liminal space itself. Through that, my definition of my mental, emotional, and psychological liminal space has changed quite a bit. It is now not only talking about the period of time after leaving my relationship and before fully moving on with my new life, but rather the whole period of my abusive relationship and the healing process of it after that right now. Whether I like it or not, my abusive relationship has been a critical step in breaking me down into further and deeper bullet points for me to determine who I truly am and what is really important in my life. The chaos that took place gave me a real chance to appreciate whatever sticks and not put too much care into whatever doesn't. This is a critical lesson for a perfectionist like me who would have really wanted to hold on to all that has crossed his life. There is an inherent beauty in letting go, and this lengthy chaos space was to show me how to do so. This is the space of orderly chaos. My true definition or purpose of this liminal space is bafflingly complex, but while I'm still here, I am determined to make the most out of it. Ignoring all of the filler, I can boil it down to these simple bullet points. This is a space for me to breathe, heal, observe, and learn. The transitionals between hot and cold, between black and white, between dark and light are never going to stop fascinating me. It is all among these spaces that life's inherent pattern and beauty emerge. After all, what even is highlight without a little shadow?